Serene Voyager, known as Sari in the soul realm, assesses her eternal journey before embarking on her next lifetime in the earth realm. Meanwhile, in the earth realm, 20-year-old Keri moves away from her birthplace in North Dakota and unwittingly surrenders her self-worth for safety, her personal power for approval, and her intuition for false promises. Later, when her chosen roles of businesswoman, wife, mother, and yoga teacher thrust her into an identity crisis rather than imbue her life with meaning, she forges a relationship with her soul, Sari. Through parallel stories, Sari helps Keri discover that joy derives not from successful role-playing, but from knowing who you are inside your human skin. And the woman who started off when I talked about my writing coach and how she was so brave in the beginning, she did write me a testimonial that I put on the back of the book, if I could share that as well. She says, "Be ready, dear reader. Adventuring into this book may change you, and you may remember another gleaming facet of who you came here to be." Her name is Opal C. McCarthy. She wrote the poetry collection Surge.
Everyone, welcome back to Living the Next Chapter. I have a great author on the show. We have pets hiding in the background, so you might hear a pet, and don't be alarmed, because pets are always welcome on the Living the Next Chapter podcast. I'm excited to have Keri on the podcast. Be talking about her book. She got another one in the works, which we're going to talk about on another day. But I'm excited to have an author on the show and lots to talk about. So, Keri, welcome to Living the Next Chapter.
Thank you so much for having me. Happy to be here. Excellent.
Tell everybody where you are in this great big world of ours.
Well, I am in the Midwest. I am in Minneapolis, Minnesota, nice. Where it is, kind of like feels a little tropical these days.
Warm, yes.
A little warm.
Good. Awesome. That's great. Tell us a little bit about your author journey. How did all this start for you? Have you been writing all your life, or is it more recent?
Wow. So the writing process, I was a yoga teacher first for about 20 years.
Okay.
And so I wrote a lot of blogs and newsletters and, all of that great stuff as a yoga teacher. And I really enjoyed putting together this newsletter. And I would this was back, I don't know, in 2002. And I had so much fun putting together like a multi-page printable newsletter. And I'd put little blogs in there, and people always commented about the writing itself. And I thought, I really do like writing, but, I'm busy being a yoga teacher and this is my journey. And so eventually, though, my yoga journey stalled out. And that's kind of what my book, Embodying Soul, is all about, about my yoga journey stalling out and why it happened and what I learned and some of the false promises that I'd bought into and so on. And so then I thought, well, I don't really have much else going on in my life right now. Writing, we know, is a great form of therapy. I've always been a journaler. Always kept a diary ever since I was a kid. So it was a great time for me to just turn my focus to that. And I started writing as a form of healing and understanding. And then at some point you think, this is helpful for me, and it's probably going to be helpful for others as well, especially if I can share it really authentically and without any, my book is pretty raw and it's very truthful, and I'm not sugarcoating anything in Embodying Soul. It is a process of undoing everything first. So it's very much against the mainstream. Mainstream models of personal growth are about boosting and building and expanding and picking yourself up again and never say never. Like all of these mottos that we're so used to, and none of those are what worked for me. And none of those are how I got to the next stage in my own evolution.
Okay. What about just the simple mechanics of writing? How did you learn how to do all this? Did you have somebody that you looked to as a support?
In the beginning, I had a writing coach because my writing, as I said, it was very raw, but there's a point that it still needs to be shaped. And it still needs to be something that people can digest and understand. It can't just be a journal entry, right? Um, and so, yes, when I first started writing and when I first started thinking, okay, this could be a book, there was a lot I had to remember. And we're talking like how to use contractions, when to use contractions, when to use semicolons, when to use colons, where to put the quotes. Um, just back to the basics of English class. And, I'd always really liked writing in high school too, but it had just been so long. So, yes, I got a writing coach, and God bless her, because I would just give her pages of ramblings and essentially ask her to pull out something that was good. But what happened in that process is that, oh, so that's what she did. She would pull out, she'd say, this is good. So then the next draft, I would just start with that little nugget, and then take that and work deeper. And so I have thousands and thousands and thousands of words in draft form that never, I mean, have no appearance anywhere in my book, because that's what it took. It took just continuing to offer up, and really it takes a certain amount of boldness to just give your ramblings to somebody and a writing coach. And I know sometimes I look back at it and I thought, oh my gosh, I've come a long way. I've come a long way. So then, of course, I'm in Minneapolis, Minnesota. We have a place called The Loft here, which is a writing community, and they offer classes and courses. And so I signed up for everything. And I did exchanges with other writers, book exchanges, essay exchanges. And at some point, if you want to get to be better as a writer, you have to be willing to give your writing to somebody else. You cannot get better in a vacuum. So that's the hardest part, I think, for a lot of writers, because a lot of us are introverts, a lot of us are private. And so you have to take that step and be willing to share your writing with people who will critique it, not just, your mom. And and in exchange, you learn a lot when you're reading other people's work, especially their early work. Yes, you can learn how to write better by reading a lot. That's a common understanding. Reading great books helps you become a great writer, but so does reading somebody's first draft.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. There's a lot of parallels between what you're saying and what I do helping people in the podcast space, because we are dealing with a little bit of imposter syndrome. We're dealing with a little bit of insecurities, maybe even feeling quite isolated as a podcaster. We do a lot of the same kind of it's an individual sport for a lot of us. So there's a lot of, you wonder when you put your things out into the world if people are going to receive it the way you intended, and you're hoping for that, right? So it's nice to have community when you're working on something like this. So you can give, but you can also receive at the same time. It's great.
It's the journey of any artist, right? And art, as we know, is subjective. So the next step is learning which comments and feedbacks to take and which ones to not. And that's, and that in itself is a bit of it's a depth of intuition that it's a muscle. And pretty soon you hear feedback, and even if it's harsh, it's good. And other times you hear feedback and it's harsh and that it's nonsense. And that understanding too comes only with practice. And, as Brene Brown would say, putting yourself in the arena and letting yourself get kicked.
Yeah.
And coming back the next day.
What point did you feel like you had found your author voice?
I would actually say that so it comes together. By the time you've got your last draft, you start to read it and you start to feel it. But when you ask that question, my thought was after I published the book.
Interesting. Okay.
Because then when I wrote essays and I wrote blogs on my website and articles for other magazines, I felt like I had a point of view now. that I was working towards as I was writing Embodying Soul.
Mm.
And so, with that point of view, and with everything that I had learned from my writing coaches and my teams and my editors, of course, I felt like I wasn't starting at that really messy place anymore. I was starting somewhere a little deeper, and I was able to know from myself where that shiny nugget was that
Mm.
I previously needed someone else to help me find. So I could still, just write everything out and then go, okay, there's the nugget, and we're going to start around that and build on that.
Okay. And, yeah, when you're writing, do you have someone in mind as your ideal reader? And are you kind of writing to them?
Sometimes yes, and sometimes no.
Okay.
Sometimes what I'm writing is something that's cathartic for me and only me. And then at some point it turns into something that can be shared for others. And then there are other pieces that absolutely I have heard somebody say something has triggered me. Oh, I use triggers all the time.
Mm.
Somebody writes something. I think I remember seeing a post once about, how their journey in life was always about seeing the good in people. And that triggered me
Mm.
because I thought people aren't always good. And we need to be a little more aware of the whole spectrum of human behavior and to always go out on the world, to always go into the world with this assumption that people will be good can set you up to get really hurt. You don't have to go into the world thinking everyone is bad, but go into the world with neutrality, right? And let people show you who they are over time and experience and build that trust. And so because I got triggered by that post and I had so many visceral feelings and responses, that whole essay was essentially written to her.
Okay.
With her in mind, I should say.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think that's great when we do have a point of reference. We want to try to, like, it's one thing to write your story and share your journey, but if you can tie that into somebody that's reading so they feel like they're part of the story as well.
Mm-hmm.
I love building that bridge between the reader and the author. I think that's a pretty sacred relationship, as we go through the process of reading and connecting with our favorite author. So I like that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And sometimes I'm triggered for the good too. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Something someone writes, makes you even more excited about saying what you have to say. And yeah, certainly you have that imaginary reader, that imaginary audience, and sometimes they're real because they respond to you. And
Yeah.
there's nothing more wonderful than hearing from readers directly.
Okay. So take us deeper into your book. Talk a little bit more about what we're going to find as a reader as we click add to cart and it shows up on our front door.
Yeah.
What are we in for here in this book?
Yeah. So Embodying Soul, the subtitle is A Return to Wholeness. And so this journey is from that place as a child where you still believe everything the culture has told you. You still believe that, you know, um, that your journey is going to unfold if you just simply play by the rules. And so there's a little naivete, sweet innocence, that childhood view of what life is supposed to be. And then, of course, like any good movie, there's the pretty start where everything is, wonderful. And then there's the hard knocks and the life lessons and the people who aren't good and how you navigate that. As I said earlier, I think a lot of personal growth teachers, books, philosophies are all about the building. But my book really shows through my own stories how we become more whole through breaking down. And so I think for readers who are looking for an alternative approach to growth that doesn't ask them to constantly uh, circumvent their own pain, that's who my book is for. It's for people who see more value in their pain and their undoings and see how that has allowed them to become more whole in that now we embrace our light and our shadow, our good and our bad, our hopes and our failures are equally influential in our journey as a human being. Now, what makes my book very unique, that's already unique, is that it takes us down and in and into the undoing, into the underbelly of human life, I would say, and then back out. The other thing that makes it unique is I do this journey with my soul, who I embody in this book and give her a voice and a name and her own journey. And so embodying soul in this book is really truly about embodying my soul. And so here's this journey of me, Keri, and then there's this journey of my soul, who I call Sari. And she has her own goals and ideas of what she wants in human life. They're different than Keri's. They are more about evolution and learning lessons. And in the beginning, these two paths are quite different because Keri has ambitious goals and her ego is leading the way. And here's Sari saying, but I just want experience and I just want to be in the mud and the muck of life. And eventually the two paths come closer together. And by the end, I'm communing with my soul, embodying my soul, making commitments to my soul to live aligned with her aspirations rather than, my own human ones.
Okay. As I hear you talk, Keri, there's so much coming through from you around balance in our life. So I take it that's something that is very important for you. Why is it so important for you to have a balanced life?
Because that's the most truthful life. And for me, my journey is all about truth. And so to deny any part of ourselves is a kind of lie. To accept it and to honor it actually tames it. So let's say there's a part of yourself that you don't, let's say you're really stubborn, but you don't really like that part of yourself, so you don't acknowledge it. Or let's say sometimes you say bad things about people and you don't like that part of yourself, so you deny it, you pretend it's not there. When you deny a part of your nature, it will actually still come through. It will still come through, but it'll come through in moments where you snap at someone and you don't know where that came from. Why'd that happen? That's not me. You yell, you get some road rage or something like that. You're like, wait a second, I don't do things like that. But of course you do. You're human. We're all human. Like, let's just accept that this is a part of being human. But if you allow these parts of your personality to act on their own, essentially, outside of our awareness, it's like unsupervised children, right? Now you pull it out and you go, yeah, I can be kind of mean. I can be rude. I can be stubborn. I can be inflexible. I can be dismissive. And now it's underneath my purview. Now I've acknowledged that. So it's less likely to catch me off guard. Now I can feel it coming on and I go, okay, what do I want to do with that? How do I want to channel that anger, that rage, that whatever part of myself that isn't my most pleasant side? How do I want to channel that? Because sometimes it does need to be channeled and expressed. Other times it does need to be redirected. Other times it does need to be traded out for something that's more valuable in that moment. But I won't be able to make those choices consciously if it's just off there outside of my periphery.
What part of your own personal journey and story would be an example of your life where you didn't have balance and which makes you realize that balance is so important? What was a point in time for you where you just realized that your life wasn't where you wanted it to be?
I'm so glad you asked that, because as I was talking, I had a particular story in mind. So anger has always been the issue for me. I grew up in North Dakota, Midwest, Minnesota, nice, right? So I grew up in North Dakota, moved to Minnesota. If people haven't ever heard of the expression Minnesota nice, it's that, yeah, if you come here, we're all pretty nice. But there is a little passive aggressiveness about that. It is this expectation that we bury our anger, especially women. And so I grew up in a family where we did not express anger, and any outbursts of anger, I was sent to my room. That was unacceptable, not allowed, don't behave that way. So anger is one of those things that I had spent a lifetime suppressing. Now, I was starting my yoga journey. Well, I was deeper into it, and I was learning some of these things and about embodiment. And so I was learning about the importance of anger and the legitimacy of it, but I had no practice with it. Zero. I'd had outbursts and stuff, but I hid them, or they were in a spot where it was fairly contained or whatever. And I remember talking to my mom on the phone, and I remember the conversation was about family and family heritage and all of this. And there was this message that she was giving me about expectations as women in our family, and what we're supposed to do and who we're supposed to be, and why we need to allow for this or allow for that. And I just felt this rage come upon me, and I had no control over it. And I yelled at my mother, and I felt awful about that, because that is not the purpose of anger. Yes, it was valid, and the way that I felt it was valid, but the purpose is not to hurt people. And I have had to learn now how to communicate those thoughts in a healthier, wiser way. And but always, if we don't bring ourselves into balance, always that's going to lead to regret. It's going to lead to hurting people you care about. Because if you're not balanced in yourself, you'll use others to try to bring yourself to balance, in some kind of unconscious way. So in a way, I was just dumping on my mom all of these things that were imbalanced in myself. It wasn't about her.
Okay. Because you jump back, you talked earlier about road rage, for example, can spark
Yeah.
a response, right? And it's an external thing that happens to you, and it's a response mechanism that happens on our behalf. I know a friend of mine was in a pretty serious car accident, and in the moment, because he was with his wife at the time, he was so worried about her in the moment that he just got so angry at the other person for causing this accident that he was unlike himself. He was a different person in the moment, and it was all based on the fear that something could have happened to his wife in that moment. So he reacted out of fear via anger. And it was so sobering for him after, when he calmed down and some clarity came back, I need to deal with my fear so that I can handle my anger. And I'm like, wow, that's pretty deep to even put those two together. But the lack of control in the moment and something happening to him that he couldn't do anything about caused him to get angry because he was fearful. So anger and fear, they're connected?
I mean, 100%. So generally, as I said, women, and this is generalizations, but generally women aren't allowed to express anger, and men aren't allowed to express fear. So he felt fear, but he
Right.
put it through the only outlet that he knew.
Interesting.
So, as we're talking about fear and anger, I mentioned in my book, I embody my soul, but I also, have you ever seen the movie Inside Out?
Oh, now we talked about this in our pre-chat.
Yep.
I was so hoping we could chat about this more. Please, let's talk about this. Yes.
Okay, so in the movie Inside Out, it's about a young girl, and then all of her emotions come to life. And so inside her head, there are fear and anger and joy. Which other ones are in there? And I'm probably missing a couple more. Sadness.
Yeah.
And they all want her best interest. They all have her best interest in mind, but they have different ways of going about it. Well, that was a very popular movie. There's now an Inside Out too. But what I wish people, well, now they do know about my book, is I was already doing that method in Embodying Soul before Inside Out was even a thing, before we even knew it. And I was already, and I have that's the other thing that's interesting and fun about my book is I do give all of my emotions voice. And in any given story, you get to watch them dialogue on my behalf because really that's what the emotions are. They're serving us in some way. And so then I remember when the movie came out, you know, well, they beat me to the punch with that idea. But maybe there's something in the air, that this is an idea that has landed on more than a couple of people. This idea of bringing emotions forward and really listening to what they have to say and honoring them as messengers so that in an instance like your friend, you can respond instead of react. Because a response comes from, okay, I'm feeling fear, I'm feeling anger, I've got all of this going on, and now I'm going to respond by doing X, Y, and Z.
Right.
React is just the first habit that comes up. That's a reaction.
Yeah.
In your friend's case, it was anger. In maybe another person's case, they'd break down in tears.
Yeah.
Someone else might have something different.
Yeah. When you saw Inside Out, was that a confirmation for you that you were on the right path, or was that a little frustrating that you're like, oh, that's my, that's my thing, right? That's exciting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
First frustration, but then gratitude because
Yeah.
it has also, as in this time with you, it has also given me a way to talk about what I do in my book in a way that people kind of it's already in the collective. People already know about it. So in a way, the movie broke down any barriers to this idea.
Good.
So when Pixar does it, everyone sees it. And then when Keri does it, okay, we're already there. We already understand. We've already seen this before. It doesn't really matter if people think I got the idea from Inside Out or not. It's still just a great way to explore emotions, and bring them into more relationship with ourselves so that we can actually dialogue with them. One of the best exercises I've ever done, on a spiritual exercise, and this was way before I was even writing, but there was an exercise that was suggested around anger, because this is back when I was working on this. And the exercise is to sit down and put like a chair across from you and start the conversation off. So that chair across from you, there sits anger. Picture it any way you want. 9-headed monsters, red eyes, whatever. And then actually start a dialogue. Say, okay, anger, you're here, you're sitting here, what is it you want? And now you change chairs and you go and sit in the chair of anger and you express the anger back to yourself. And you switch back and forth in these seats, basically talking to yourself, right? But talking to your emotion, anger. And what was so fascinating for me is every time I switched chairs, how my voice would change, because I was either just me or I was my anger, which was a different voice. And I learned so much in that dialogue and I learned kind of what, to your point, that underneath all of my anger, there was a scared girl. There was frustration, there was sadness, there was disappointment, there was disillusionment, so much disillusionment about promises of the world, about what I'm supposed to be or do, what people expect of me and how I've failed them. All of that was there.
What was your fear in writing this book?
Yeah. My greatest fear my whole life has been of being deemed an outsider, of not fitting in, of being weird, of other people, excluding me or plotting around me. I mean, when I was a kid, I had conspiracy theories about this, about the world just everyone was in on something and I wasn't. So that's always been my greatest fear. And certainly with the book as different as I'm expressing to you today, where you're talking to your emotions and you're talking to your soul, there could have been a confirmation that happened with putting out this book. Oh, she really is weird. She really is an outsider. I mean, yeah. And I think what happened instead is that I've claimed that status for myself of of an outsider because it is only from the outside that you really can see the truth of things. You know, if you're an insider, quote unquote, if you're in the popular group, there's a lot you can't see, and you are so under the power and under the influence of those around you. But when you're an outsider, and you're also outside all that influence, you're also outside all of their manipulations and all of their stories and all of their myths. And at first, that is striking and scary, but there's a point where, and I think through the book, I think that's what's happened for me, is there's a point where you say, yeah, that's it, I am. And let me be that voice from the outside coming back in now. See if I can draw more insiders out. Instead of me trying to
Okay.
get in, I'm trying to pull them out.
So, had you not written Embodying Soul, do you think you would be where you are right now
Hmm,
on your journey?
absolutely not.
Mm.
Because when I was writing this book, I was still stuck in so much of this pain that I write
Okay.
about. Um, I could still feel it viscerally as I wrote it and even as I reread it. Now I read the book and it's almost as if it happened to somebody else because it's been so digested, so healed, so worked over, so molded that it doesn't have that same visceral reaction like it just happened yesterday for me anymore. So without the book, I wouldn't have the healing. Without the healing, I might still be trying to fit in. I might still be trying to ask for belonging in some group. I still might not have that freedom of expression that I feel like that book has given me.
The one thing I had an author do recently on the podcast is they read off the back of the book.
Mm.
And I kind of liked it because it's in the author's voice, and hearing the author read the back of the book to us was like a really cool moment. I don't know. Would you be willing to do that for us from your book?
I'd love to.
Oh, please. Oh, please. Yeah.
But I might have to put on my glasses for this.
There you go. Sure.
Serene Voyager, known as Sari in the Soul Realm, assesses her eternal journey before embarking on her next lifetime in the Earth Realm. Meanwhile, in the Earth Realm, 20-year-old Keri moves away from her birthplace in North Dakota and unwittingly surrenders her self-worth for safety, her personal power for approval, and her intuition for false promises. Later, when her chosen roles of businesswoman, wife, mother, and yoga teacher thrust her into an identity crisis rather than imbue her life with meaning, she forges a relationship with her soul, Sari. Through parallel stories, Sari helps Keri discover that joy derives not from successful role playing, but from knowing who you are inside your human skin. And the woman who started off when I talked about my writing coach and how she was so brave in the beginning, she did write me a testimonial that I put on the back of the book. If I could share that as
Yeah.
well.
Oh, please. Oh, yes. Yes.
She says, be ready, dear reader. Adventuring into this book may change you, and you may remember another gleaming facet of who you came here to be. Her name is Opal C. McCarthy. She wrote the poetry collection Surge.
Excellent. Okay. So I want you to envision this for a moment. You're you have the opportunity to sit down with Sari and ask Sari a question that you do not know the answer to. What's the question you want to ask?
Since the writing of this book, in what ways have I broken my promises to you?
Oh.
Because it's been 4 years
Yeah.
since I've been so intensely working on that relationship. And I know I made promises, and I know that we're human, but it might be interesting for me to reflect on where those promises have been broken. Yeah. And then,
See,
get back on track.
this is what I love about talking to authors on the podcast, because when you get the copy of the book yourself as a listener, you buy a copy and you leave a great review, obviously, is that you can hear this. You can go back and listen to this again and then start reading. Because as you hear Keri talk on the show, it's just, you can tell she's just oozing out of her. Like, right? It's like this book can't contain it all. So you're getting a little extra behind the scenes to the book. And I think you're going to get more out of it just by listening to you on the show. So that's what I love about these kind of conversations around books. It's great.
And I so appreciate it too, because again, with a book that's got some more interesting aspects to it, it is helpful to have a moment to just open it up and explore it first. So
it's great. I'm learning a lot. I like this. It's really good. I do have a question here to end off here as we're going to close up in a moment. But before we do that, I'm on your website. It's a beautiful website, by the way. Tell everybody about your site, where we can get the books, and maybe where you're most active on social so we can come and have a conversation with you as a listener.
Okay. So my website is at kerimangis.com. So www.kerimangis.com. On my homepage, I do have a free book. It's a flip book about transformation, which is where I'm going with my next book. So I'll just drop that little hint there.
Nice.
People want to read this one and then maybe start taking steps towards the next one. I am all over social media, but lately I'm most active on Medium as a writer. I have a newsletter on Substack called The Power Source that I definitely invite people to search up and join me on. And yeah, I hang out on Instagram and Twitter as well. So I'm all over the place. Facebook. Yeah.
Great. Okay, so you did steal my thunder, so well done. As my closing off the podcast, the name of my show is Living the Next Chapter, so I gotta use the name of my show in a question so that I get to say the name of my podcast. How are you living your next chapter? We're talking, there's a new book coming in the future. You're going to come back and talk about it on the program in the future. But what can you tell us about what's coming down the path for us as readers?
Yes, thank you. So I am super excited because as the years since Embodying Soul have been published, and as I have found my author voice, as we talked about earlier, I realize that what I'm really here on earth to do is take people through a process of transformation, where it's not just change, it's not just growth, it's not just adaptation, but real caterpillar to butterfly style transformation. And so my next book is called, I'll give you the title. It's got a title.
Ooh. All right.
It's called The Essential Ingredient: Remaking Ourselves in Times of Crisis. So it is going to be about, as I mentioned early on, how these times of darkness in our lives, how our breakdowns. So I talk about an identity crisis, spiritual crisis, the dark night of the soul. I talk about cultural, collective crises as well, such as we saw with COVID. It was a great example. I take people through shadow work, which is what I was referring to when we're talking about balance, bringing back these aspects of ourselves. I talk about going into the imaginal world where we can reclaim our gifts and our imagination, and then we rebirth ourselves as something brand new. So that is my next book. Hopefully spring 2025.
Nice.
Yeah.
And you are going to come back and celebrate that book when that's ready as well.
I would love to.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, that's a shameless plug and request at the same time. I like that. I like that. Keri, thank you so much for being here. What a great conversation. I know that the listeners are really going to enjoy hearing your thoughts around your journey as an author, and to grab Embodying Soul and be ready for the next one as well. This is exciting to have you here. So thank you for making time for us.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Excellent. Any last parting words to your readers as they fall in love with you as an author?
Let's see. May their endless curiosity always lead the way.
That is nice. Thanks for being here, Keri. Appreciate it. Hey, thanks for listening all the way to the end of the podcast. That's a big signal to all of the players, the YouTubes, the Apples, the Spotifys, that you found value in this episode of Living the Next Chapter. Just by you listening to the end. You just sent a huge bat signal out to the app saying this was a great podcast, a great conversation. So you listening to this point, you've done your job. I have one more ask of you. If you know anyone that would benefit from this conversation, would you share this episode with them? Would you just send them a message, send them the episode, tell them about this episode, tell them to go livinginthenextchapter.com to get all the information about the podcast. Can you do that for me? Because the more people that hear this message, this episode, the better. I want to support these amazing authors. And I know you do as well. So sharing this episode really helps. And I appreciate you. See you on the next episode. And thank you for listening to Living the Next Chapter.